Our featured guest tonight was a contributor to what many consider to be the sound of the 90s. His band, Toad the Wet Sprocket, was discovered while he was still in high school, and they went on to make multiple platinum and gold records with hits like All I Want, Fall Down, Walk on the Ocean, and Good Intentions from the Friends soundtrack. All the while, shirking the normal trappings of fame and whilst keeping their own character and integrity. Here to chat about his work, the band Toad the Wet Sprocket, their current tour, and as much wisdom as we can glean from him is Toad's lead singer, Glen Phillips. Glen, welcome to the show.
How do you do? Happy to be here.
I know music was part of your life from some of the earliest stages. Was music a big part of your home life growing up?
Not a huge one. My mom is singularly non-musical, and my father was he could do a really bad version of Malagueño. He had an old Goya like Spanish guitar, but then dun 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 dun. That's all he could do. So they were both hard sciences. He was physics and she was organic chem, and so I think my brother and I skipped a generation, and we're both music nerds. So,
when did you first pick up a guitar?
Sixth grade, I think I took lessons. I was always more interested in writing than playing, so I didn't apply myself as a guitarist very hard. And also I'm left-handed and started playing right-handed, so the plumbing wasn't there for me to be very good. So I concentrated on writing pretty early.
When did you first start writing?
Probably like seventh grade.
Do you still have like your first song written somewhere and periodically look back and go, oh, wow?
I wish I could find it. I was more of a theater nerd back then. I was really oriented towards theater pretty much up until Toad got signed. And so I had written, I think my first song was like I'd been listening to a lot of Rush. So I was into things like Hemispheres, and I met a girl I went to Interlochen Arts Camp in Michigan. And so I wrote this like 8-minute epic about Janet from Syracuse. That I can't remember any of, but I'm sure it's an embarrassing patchwork.
So I was going to ask you what genres and artists you were listening to at that time, but it's interesting because Rush was one of yours. Rush was likewise one of mine, and we may talk about that a little bit later on. Now you started with Toad, I want to say at 15, and then like 2 years later had a record deal. When you look back at that time in your life, what kind of stands out to you the most?
3 years. I mean, we started when I was 14 or 15. I started playing with Todd. I was a freshman at San Marcos High, and we were in Oklahoma and our town together. So we were all in theater and choir. Dean, our bass player, sang "The Farmer and the Cowman Should Be Friends." So like theater nerds. And so, I mean, we started then, and yeah, got signed when I was 18. So, and I got out of high school at 16 and was going to the city college in town. It was a strange experience. Like, it was our first band. We made an album thinking it would, just kind of come out in town. We had a cassette we were selling at the local record stores, and we were not super ambitious. I was planning on going away to San Francisco State and studying. I had decided I wanted to be a high school teacher and do like arts and social sciences at a high school level, because that seemed to me to be suitable for my sensitive soul, because I knew that hustling was not going to be something I had the spine for. And later experience would prove it right. I mean, you were talking about us being outside the mainstream, and I think a large part of the reason for that was, kind of an extreme case of imposter syndrome. And so we were, I always felt like people were going to figure out that I wasn't who they thought I was and send me packing. But I also knew that going in. So, yeah, it was strange, but I didn't really know anything else. I mean, when that happens when you're 18 and, we hadn't even sent out demos. There was this guy, Nick Terzo, who ended up being an A&R guy at Columbia, but he was working at ASCAP, and he found our original tape, and he started dubbing off cassette copies and sending them to record companies. So we didn't think we were ready for a record deal. And he started sending tapes off and we'd never even met him. And then the next thing we knew, we were meeting with all these labels. And so it was pretty unexpected whirlwind.
So it wasn't like you guys were, I was looking back and going, how could they be prepared at all at basically as essentially just out of high school for what would be to come? For our viewers who are unfamiliar with the origin of the band's name, Toad the Wet Sprocket comes from a Monty Python skit. Can you tell us the story behind that? And I'm also curious, were there any other names in contention that you guys could have been?
I mean, we didn't have any good names and we wanted a really cool name, but we had a gig and it was Dean, the bass player, and it's a deep cut for Monty Python, right? It's rock notes from the Contractual Obligation album. So it wasn't even on the TV shows. And it was Rex Stardust, lead electric triangle for Toad the Wet Sprocket, had to have an elbow removed following their recent worldwide tour of Finland. Anyway, so it was a series of like terrible band names, like Poached Herring in a White Wine Sauce was one of the band names. Luckily we didn't choose that, but, it was just ridiculous. And we thought it would be hilarious to see it in print. And we were going to come up with the coolest band name ever. And then a year passed and we still hadn't thought of a cool name. So there we were. The weirdest part of it all is that there's actually another band called Toad the Wet Sprocket that's like a hard rock blues band from Northern England who apparently got back together during the pandemic. So now we may have to go like Toad the Wet Sprocket UK, Toad the Wet Sprocket US, which is about as ridiculous as a thing has ever happened.
I'm pretty sure you've heard the famous quote from Eric Idle on that Monty Python sketch, right? And I'm going to quote for our audience. I once wrote a sketch about rock musicians. I was trying to think of a name that would be so silly nobody would ever use it or dream it could ever be used. So I wrote the words Toad the Wet Sprocket. A few years later, I'm driving along the freeway in LA and a song comes on the radio and DJ says, "That was by Toad the Wet Sprocket." And I nearly drove off the freeway. And that quote got me thinking, have you all been connected in any way with any of the members of Monty Python? I met
Jeff Cleese a few times because he's a local, and we sent Eric Idle a gold record. He called us at some point and we said thanks for the name, and he said, "Yeah, it's great. Enjoy it. I won't sue you if you ever get a gold record. Send me one, and there will be no legal proceedings." And so
that's hilarious.
We eventually got a gold record, and we sent it to him.
That's fantastic. That is so superb.